Alright, so today I want to talk about something that's been kind of popping up quite prominently, but the more I leave it, the more videos come up, so clearly it's of interest. So I want to talk about what this thing is, and what it is essentially a third-person perspective mode could be coming to Village as DLC or a free update in the near future. For context on what has kind of started this conversation, at the Game Awards, which was at the beginning of the month, they do a ceremony at the end of the show for in dedication to the nominees of the Game Award, or the Game of the Year award. Obviously Village was one of them. So what they do is they do like a live music performance that's themed around all the games, like combined, and then do like a kind of a bit for each of them as well. And in the behind them, there's a massive screen that shows the game in the background. And in the Village portion, you see it from a third-person perspective behind Ethan when he first enters the village, from the bit that happens later on in this part of the game. When you first kind of walk out and see it all, and it's all in third person. So everyone's kind of thinking, is that something? Is it a hint? Is it a tease? And it's started a lot of conversation. Now there's two sides to this. There's people that want a third-person perspective. People like Resident Evil in third person. It's always been in third person, or from camera angles. So first person is quite new, and I remember when 7 came out, and it was kind of announced obviously that it was in first person, people were concerned. But then look at 7, now it's the best selling game in the franchise, with good reason, it's amazing. And then 8 as well, 8 has done really well, it got nominated for Game of the Year, for God's sake, it's not a bad game at all. I don't think the perspective makes a difference to the gameplay. But people do want it, people don't want it. And I'm just going to kind of throw my kind of own opinions about a third-person view in Village, because there's a lot to kind of talk about with it. So let's just jump into that. The first thing I want to mention is they started the Ethan Winters story in 7 in first person, and there's a reason people say Ethan in 7 doesn't really have a personality, doesn't really have any character at all. He's just like a dude. He's just like a everyday man. They did that on purpose. They've even said that completely outright in interviews in the past and stuff like that, that they want the player in 7 to feel as if it's them. Like, they don't want this character to have their own kind of thing going on. This is like a immersion thing. It's like, what if you were in the situation that he's in right now? How would you feel? And again, that's why it's in first person. You see through his eyes as well. That's what they did with 7. With 8, people complained that Ethan didn't have personality and that kind of thing in 7 as much as he should. So 8, they definitely fleshed him out a little bit more as well, but kept it in first person because, again, you're playing as Ethan. You're not watching what Ethan's doing from a third person perspective. You're playing as him and experiencing these things that happen to him through his eyes. So it makes sense to be in first person. But that's just from a kind of development standpoint. That's what they said about the game, what is in first person, what they decided to make the shift. On top of that, obviously, 7 was a very horror-focused game, and a first-person perspective is always going to make that feel better, because you don't know what's coming, and you don't know what's behind you, either. That's a third person, you can kind of see either side of you, a bit behind you, but in first person, it's just here, and that's it. So the gameplay perspective, first person was a pretty breath of fresh air, really, for the series. Every single one, bar a couple of spin-offs, are in third person, so it's nice to have different change, and again, it does add another layer of horror and such to the game, which is nice. Okay, so now let's get on to the more nitty-gritty part of it, and how the game could or couldn't work in third person. And I personally think it couldn't really work as well in third person as it does in first. Look at the environments you're in. The prime example would be probably Donna's territory, her house. Those corridors are very, very tight. It's very, narrow corridors you have to walk down. And you can't see, which is another thing. Imagine that corridor being just as dark as it is. But then not only can you not see, but you're looking at someone's back the whole time. You can't see anything. A lot of that horror in that sequence does kind of depend on the first person perspective, because you can't see, you don't know what's coming, and then the reveal of the monster in there in first person is crazy. and other parts of the games that kind of would be affected by a third person perspective is when Ethan gets injured. Look at the bit in the moment where he gets his hand bit off, and when he gets his hand cut off later on. You're not really going to see that in third person because it's going to be a completely different angle. If you look at the cutscenes in this game, they don't like pan out into a third person for a cutscene. They're always in first person. You know, things happen in the cutscenes to Ethan physically that you see happen. You know, you see his hand get cut off from here in first person. In third, it just wouldn't have the same effect. I think a lot of the kind of territory parts of the map, you know, the castle, Moreau's area, the factory, and Donna's area as well, they're all very, like I've said, you know, a minute ago, they're all very condensed, they're all very tight, they are built for first person. These outside areas, like in the village, like, again, the first initial encounter with the Lycans, you're in an open space. You know, you have a lot of room to work with. Third person could be pretty good there. Same with the stronghold and the boss fight in the stronghold. It's not as small of an area to deal with. You know, you have a lot more room. The camera can kind of work a bit better in a third person perspective there than it does, you know, in the castle or in Donna's house. It feels like they will have to change things to make it feel more like, what's the word I'm looking for? To make it feel more kind of, to make it make sense to be in third person, you know, because I don't want to be looking at his back the whole time going down the corridor, but I have to be seeing where I'm going in, you know what I mean? Like with the 2 remake and the 3 remake, it's not too, like, obviously the maps are tight, the RPD is a small environment, all the rooms are small, and the corridors are quite tight, but nowhere near as much as Ethan in Donna's house. Like, they're like this, but where RPD's corridors are like this. Like, there's room for the camera to work, basically. Now, we're obviously going to look at both sides for this. That's just the reasons why I think it couldn't work. Again, I could see it working in some of the bigger combat areas. Again, this portion, Stronghold could work as well, most of that. Chris's portion would work completely fine, I'd imagine. The boss fight would be an interesting one, but apart from that, I think we're good. At the end of the day, most people that are playing Village now have finished it, so that first experience, people have done it already. And, you know, if they did release a third person perspective and someone picked up the game because of it, or whatever the reason may be, maybe they're just getting around to playing it now, and that mode is out, if it is a thing, I would always encourage someone to play it first person first, because it's how the game was made initially, you know what I mean? Like, it's how it should be experienced. But then for people like me, and people who I'm sure have played this game through just as many times as me, the third person perspective would be fresh. It would make the game feel a bit more fresh because you're playing it in a different way. Obviously it's the same game, but you'll just have a different kind of, again, perspective for everything, which would be nice. So for people who have played the game to death already like me, I'm sure it would be really good. For people who have not played the game already, I would say play it in first person first, because again, it's how the game was designed in the first place, and then play in third person afterwards. But it is one of those things that people do want to see come back to the series anyway. You know, this is something I've mentioned before, briefly in videos in the past and quite recently as well. I do believe, possibly, that Resident Evil 9 could be a third person game. When they first introduced Rose as, you know, her kind of adult self, you know, it's not from a first person perspective. You see the character model is done, the character has, you know, a model reference, a real person, you know, like Mia did, and someone else, all the Bakers did as well. They have real people they're modelled after. So she's a fully fleshed out character, and they could be doing that because the game will be in third person, and obviously if you remember the out of camera glitches you could do in 7 where you'd kind of pan into like a spectator mode essentially and Ethan wouldn't have a head. They changed that in this game, but his face isn't emoted at all or anything like that. It's just a face. So when he's getting hurt, it's just stone cold. But they've already fleshed out Rose, so she could be, if she's the main character in 9, which I would probably assume she will be, it's probably going to be in third person, as well as Chris. If Chris is playable again, or if any other returning characters are playable, it would probably be in third person, or at the very least, be developed in a way where both work pretty perfectly. So, it'd be a safe bet to say that there will be third person in the future. I think we'll go back to it at some point. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of get the news out there if no one had seen it yet, and kind of get my kind of thoughts on it out. If it happens, I'm not going to play it. At the end of the day, it's something new to do in Village, and I'm waiting for the DLC at this point. If that's all it ends up being, like a couple extra options or modes or whatever, it's still something new to do and experience in the game. So whatever they do, I'll be taking a look at it regardless. And I'm not saying third person is a bad thing. All the other games are in third person, and I love them all. So I don't have a problem with third person. I just feel like this game is made for first person. So if it's real, great. If it's not, great. Either way, I'm not too bothered. But yeah, that's just my kind of thoughts about it. But let me know what you think. Obviously, I'm very interested to know how people feel about a third person mode coming to the game. Do you think it works? Do you think it doesn't? Do you prefer first or third person in a Resident Evil game now you've experienced both? Let me know. But yeah, thank you for watching. I'll catch you all tomorrow.